So today we begin a brand new section, the laws of Torah study. Really, the laws of Torah study are a huge section, but Kitzer, in his classy way, manages to just put it into a few halachas. There's a lot more to be discussed, and perhaps we'll go through the text today as far as what's included in the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. And then perhaps tomorrow we could take a look at a little bit of a more comprehensive understanding of what there is to understand, or what the mitzvah of studying Torah is. So we're up to section 27. So we have concluded prayer, and now we've moved on to Torah study, because immediately after a person davens, first thing they should do is learn something, which we'll see in a moment. So we're actually going chronologically. We started the day, we woke up in the morning, we got dressed, we davened. Now we'll quickly learn something, and then we'll speak about proper conduct, which will take us into eating something, because ideally a person shouldn't eat before davening unless he's not going to be able to concentrate, as we spoke about a few months back. And then, a person should eat something. Breakfast is quite important, and then we go off to business, to work. And we're in work all day, and then it comes time for the evening prayers. And then the week flies by, and it's time for Shabbos, and then Yom Tov. These are family, obviously, is always important, but I guess it's just once we've gone through the section of the Shulchan Aruch that goes in order of time, then we speak about the life cycle. So we speak about mitzvahs relating to the family, and then also monetary law, which is really its own section. There's laws of business, and then there's monetary law, which is more what a person would go to Beis Din about. So it's not so much just about how a Jew should conduct himself in business, but more about financial questions. And finally, we come to the laws of somebody who is sick, and then the laws of mourning, which brings us to the end of the life cycle. And that covers the whole book of the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. So we now move on to section 3, Torah study, which is fairly short. And in this section, we will speak about these 5 subjects. So you can follow along on the left or on the right, or listen in. So after davening, time should be set aside for the study of Torah. It's necessary that the study period be on a regular basis, so that one will not skip them over, even if it means earning a big profit, meaning that the person should establish times for Torah study, and those times should be absolutely fixed, that they're not negotiable. They're not, even if there's financial loss involved. And he brings over here from the Gemara, which says that such a person who is absolutely dedicated to his set times of learning is called a man of faith. Why? Because he believes that whatever profit he is destined to make, Hashem will send his way, even if he finishes his Torah lesson. Meaning, if a person has faith to understand that, yes, by concluding my lesson, it might mean I'm incurring a loss, but if I realize that my money doesn't just come from the time I put in, but it comes from Hashem, then I'll realize that this time is holy. It's designated to Torah study. Now, this doesn't mean that a person certainly doesn't need to take his work seriously. He certainly does. And soon we'll discuss how there's a minimal amount of Torah that a person is obligated to study, which could be a very small amount. So certainly if a person is required to be at work at certain hours, then he needs to be at work at those hours. However, if he manages to fix into his calendar a set time for Torah study, which everybody is required to do, but if that particular time at some time wants to be overridden by a financial concern, he should have trust in Hashem that his parnasa comes from Hashem, and stick to it. Even if a person must attend to a very important matter, he should first study at least one Torah verse or one law, and then take care of his affairs. And then his daily study period, meaning, so if a person has, let's say every day he reads the daily parsha, and suddenly there's an urgent meeting. So since this is the time, let's say every day at 8 o'clock, from 8 to 8:15, I study the daily Torah sections, daily section of the parsha. So suddenly at 8 o'clock, somebody's ringing at my door, and they've come to whatever it is. They've come to fix the electric fence, or whatever it is, and I can't keep them waiting. Then rather than just abandoning that set time for Torah study, I should learn at least one halacha, which could maybe take even less than a minute, but I've learned something, and then attend to whatever needs to be attended to. And then afterwards, I could come back and learn whatever I was planning to learn. I could make it up. So this I've often told people. Any of you that have a personal study session with me will know that even if it means learning for 5 minutes or for 2 minutes, it's worth it rather than cancel. Because once you've set a time for Torah study, that carries tremendous value and tremendous brachos, and so therefore we shouldn't quit it. We shouldn't abandon it completely. Okay. Some communities have established Torah study groups that meet immediately after davening, and every God-fearing man should join them. Meaning, we should certainly strive to participate in these learning groups. There's a certain holiness and specialty and special brachas involved when davening, when a group of people learn together. There's a special power in davening together, and there's also a special power in learning together. Therefore, somebody who's looking to increase his relationship with Hashem should try to see to it that he could participate in such a learning program. So that's as far as fixed times. And once we're on this, I'd like to mention that the Rebbe writes he wrote a book called Hayom Yom, which was a diary with a thought for every day of the year. And in this compilation, the Rebbe says that having a fixed time for Torah study doesn't only mean fixed in the clock, but it means fixed in one's soul. I'm not sure if it's in the Hayom Yom. Either way, I found this to be a very powerful concept. And that is that when a person sits down to learn, they become fixated on what they're learning. So it could even be for a few seconds, but at that moment, we're fully there, we're fully present. And then that really transforms the experience. So a fixed time is not only fixed in our diary, but it means fixed in our head that we could put our phone on airplane mode and whatever other distractions that they may come, so that we're really set and fixed and involved. And so then what we have is not just a fixed time in quantity, but a fixed time in quality. And when we do that, then it becomes permanent. Then that becomes a fixture, keeping with the word fixed, in our home. If we feel that when we're learning, this is something we really invest ourselves in, then that begins to become a fixture in our life. And that obviously is very transformational. Everybody's looking for inspiration. You know, we're dealing with tough times now. Everybody's looking for inspiration. There's no doubt that when a person, you know, if you decide to install in your house a big, beautiful chandelier as you walk in, and every time you walk into the house, you're going to see that chandelier. It's going to brighten up your mood because you see so much light and such beauty, whatever it might be, whether it's a chandelier or a painting. And that may in some way make a person happier because they walk inside and their spirit is raised by the beauty of what they see. A person buys a new home, a new car, whatever it may be. So when we're all looking for inspiration, there's no doubt that by having a fixture of Torah study in our home, in our lives, meaning that it's something that's set, that it's a deep part of what we do, that certainly becomes a source of nourishment for our neshama and becomes a source of inspiration. So fixed times means not just fixed on the clock, but being fixed in ourselves, which creates a beautiful fixture in our lives. Okay, now, what about maybe learning is not for everybody? I mean, in South Africa, it seems to me that often people believe that learning is for the rabbi. Obviously, you all don't because you're here right now, but there's some kind of conception that I'll come to shul and I'll be committed. But as far as being able to open up a book, forget about it. And that is obviously, what do you call it, a mental block, because anybody who's got a brain in his head has the ability to open up a book and to learn. And the mitzvah of Torah study applies to everybody. Everybody has an opportunity and ability to involve himself in the study of Torah. No matter whether he is poor, meaning that he might say, I can't afford it, can't afford the time, or he's rich, He's got so many bank accounts or whatever it is, assets to deal with, that he doesn't have the time either. Doesn't make a difference, poor or rich, whether he is healthy or suffering pain. Even if a person is suffering, whether he is young or is very old, you're never too young and you're never too old. Even a beggar who goes from door to door must set aside a certain time for Torah study during the day and night. As the Torah says, and you shall meditate in it day and night. Okay, now what happens if a person lacks the knowledge to study Torah? Or it's impossible for him to study because he is burdened with so many concerns, too many concerns, that he should support others. So what happens if a person sees that he's just not managing? He really feels like he just is not able to learn. He just can't because he's so burdened. So then at least he should support others who do engage in Torah study, and it will be considered as though he himself has studied. As our rabbis of blessed memory explained the verse, rejoice Zavulun in your going out and Yisachar in your tents. So Zavulun and Yisachar were two of our forefather Yaakov Avinu, Jacob's sons. Jacob had 12 sons, and two of those sons were Zavulun and Yisachar. And the verse says that Zavulun rejoices going out into the world, and Yisachar is in the tents. So what does a person do when he goes out? He goes to make a buck. What does a person do when he's sitting in the tent? He's sitting and learning. I guess nowadays everything is, but that's a whole other story with COVID. But anyhow, Zavulun and Yisachar, our sages tell us, made a partnership. Zavulun ran a business, and he supported Yisachar, so that Yisachar would be able to be engrossed in the study of Torah. And because of this, the Torah actually mentioned Zavulun, the businessman, before Yisachar, the Torah sage. Why? Since all of the Torah learning of Yisachar was made possible through the support of Zavulun. So the Torah actually gives precedence to the businessman that supports the study of Torah over the person that's studying the Torah himself. And so we find in the Mishnah, Shimon, the brother of Azariah, said, Shimon is described as who? The brother of Azariah. Why is Shimon described as the brother of Azariah? Because Azariah was engaged in business and provided for the needs of his brother Shimon. So whenever we mentioned the sage Shimon, we said, who is he? He's Azariah's brother, because Azariah is the one that gets the credit for him being able to sort of learn. They made an agreement between themselves that Azariah would have a share in Shimon's reward for Torah study. However, even so, every person should do his utmost to study Torah, even just a little, every day and every night. So in summary, who is learning for? Well, there's different levels of learning. Some people may have the ability, the headspace, the brain power, menuchas hanefesh, to be able to sit and learn for many hours. Others might not. They may have many burdens. And so such a person who is required to work crazy hours, maybe a doctor, for example, so he too needs to learn a little bit at least. He needs to make sure that every morning and every night is a little bit in the day, a little bit at night. It could be even 2 minutes. It could be, Rabbi Simpson's daily mitzvah WhatsApp. But a person should be learning a little bit every day and every night. However, if that's all he's managing to do, I mean, it's a little bit unfortunate. If we think about the value of Torah study, then this person is in some way spiritually deprived. We've just spoken about how milk is our spiritual nourishment. It's the Jewish milk. It's what people say gives us all of our chokhmah, our wisdom. So what happens about the person that feels deprived of the opportunity to be able to study Torah more than just a few minutes in the morning and a few minutes at night? He would love to be learning for hours, delving into fascinating subjects and fascinating topics throughout the sages, but he just feels he can't. So the Torah tells us that if he supports a Torah sage in doing so, then he gets the reward as if he himself learned. So much so that he's mentioned even before the Torah sage. As we see, the two brothers, Yisachar and Zvulun, although Yisachar was the learned one and Zvulun was the businessman, Zvulun is mentioned before Yisachar because he is the one that enabled Yisachar to learn, which perhaps explains why I find it quite interesting that very often you have businessmen that give a tremendous amount of tzedakah towards the study of Torah. And you might wonder if, somebody, especially if they're not as involved, um, perhaps they should see more of a need for welfare. Torah study, that's not, if it's to support the poor, absolutely. If it's to support the sick, absolutely, whatever it may be. But just to allow somebody to sit and learn, like, why? That seems to be the worst choice, one might think. One might think it's the worst choice of where to give one's tzedakah. But this halacha gives us context, because every Jew wants to be nourished by the proteins of the Torah. And therefore, a businessman who feels that he doesn't have that opportunity to sit and learn also wants to have a part in the study of Torah. So by him supporting others that are studying Torah, that allows him to also be involved in the study of Torah in another way. So really, all partners of JTI and the study of Torah are not just helping others, but they're partners in that they actually reap the benefits. They themselves actually receive from the nourishment of the Torah that is being studied. So there was the quick, pitch. But now back to halacha number 3. Okay, so we've spoken about fixed times, we've spoken about who should study Torah, what should we learn? Okay, so here's the breakdown. The person who cannot study Torah full-time, but sets aside regular periods for Torah study, should use these set hours to study the halachas, the laws that occur frequently, and which every Jew must know. So in order of priority, number 1 in the order of priority of the study of Torah is to do exactly what we are doing right now, to know the halachas, to know exactly what needs to be done, because that's practical, right? People like to be practical. So from a Torah perspective as well, although Torah has tremendous wisdom, tremendous depth and soul, the first priority when it comes to studying Torah, especially for somebody whose time is limited, is to know the halachas, to know practically how to conduct himself as a Jew, how to live Jewish. In addition to that, he should also study Agados and Midrashim. So Agados and Midrashim tell us a lot of stories of what happens to the rabbis and the sages and our prophets, and books of ethics, which are based on sacred sources such as the Midrashim of the rabbis of blessed memory. So when a person reads these stories about the sages, then it gives a person a level of spiritual sensitivity, of yiras shamayim, of fear of heaven. Often, sometimes we feel cold and uninterested. And when we read these stories, and often a story speaks to the soul in a unique way. Sometimes a person could give a drasha, but a story can say more than 1,000 words. So when we read these sections of the Torah that share the stories, it touches us in a unique way, giving us that added appreciation and the sensitivity towards Hashem. These studies help man restrain his evil impulses. If a person is feeling that he's not managing to abstain from his negative impulses, that cheeseburger just really looks so good, and he's wondering how's he ever going to hold himself back. So by reading these sections of the Torah, that gives him that added yiras shamayim, fear of heaven, that added spiritual sensitivity, that he's armed to be able to withstand that temptation. Fortunate is the man who has made a fixed and unbending resolution to study the book of Chayk Yisrael on a daily basis. So this isn't done so much today, but there's a particular book, Chayk Yisrael. Chayk Yisrael was like it had a daily section, a section for each day. And included in that, for example, was the daily Chumash. So some of you that are with me today, I know every day, learn the section of the Chumash that applies to that day of the week. On Sunday, it's the first Aliyah. On Monday, it's the second Aliyah. So by Shabbos, you've done all 7. That's very powerful to establish the daily study of Chumash and of Rambam. Once we're at it, that's another great, it's not here in the Kitzur because there's a recent developments, recent campaign for everybody to study the same chapter of Rambam a day. That's also powerful. There's also an amazing custom of many to study a page of Gemara a day, which takes a whole new level of commitment. And the more a person studies, the more blessings he receives from heaven. Thank you for joining us. And Wishing you a wonderful evening.